Okay, today we'll go over Chapter 7 in the Fundamentals of Building Construction. This primarily deals with interior finishes for wood light frame construction. We'll start out with talking about the building enclosure or the envelope. The first thing that is required under the code and in any building is that the building has to be weather tight. Or weather resistant. Yes, that's actually a code requirement that the building does not allow water to, or snow or any of the elements to enter into the building. Next is that we have to insulate buildings against cold temperatures and hot temperatures. So in climates like Michigan, we have to provide insulation to keep the cold out in the wintertime. And areas like Florida and Texas, the insulation is there to keep the cold in the house because it's so hot outside. And that is the biggest item that we look for is the R value, or thermal resistance. And the higher the R value, the greater resistance to heat flow it has in the material. So if you have an R value of 40 versus an R value of 10, more heat will go through the R value 10 insulation. There are several basic types of insulation. There is rigid, there's fiberglass, they're blown in, and there's foam in place. The rigid, like the name implies, is a hard, non-flexible material. There are several basic types. Polystyrene, and those are two types. That's it's expanded and extruded. The expanded type, you're probably familiar with the brand name of the brand name of Styrofoam. It's actually the little beads that are heated in place to form your cups. The same thing is done for the polystyrene, the expanded type. I'm sorry, I got a typo in here. That's what I get for going too fast. The extruded type is actually different in that it is extruded from a wet system and comes out as a rigid board, and it has a much higher R value. One of the differences is that the extruded can be used below grade because it does not break. If you use the expanded, it does not degrade. If you use the expanded below grade, it'll start to degrade because of the water and temperatures, and that becomes useless. So that's why below grade you need to have the extruded type. There's also another one, and that's the polyisocyanurate board. It's a much higher value. By example, the polystyrene, the expanded type, has an R value of about 4 per inch. The extruded has an R value of about 5 per inch. And where the polyisocyanates has an R value of also 5 per inch. A common one that is used for walls, floors, and ceilings is a fiberglass. You've probably seen it used a lot in residential construction. It's a flexible type. and it comes in varying thicknesses, anywhere from 1.5 inches up to 12 inches in thickness. And that has a R value of 3.2 per inch. So you can see by a blown in, is also another one, like the name implies. It actually is blown into air cavities and above ceilings that would fit in between the roof rafters. Obviously you can't use a blown in underneath, let's say, a crawl space for the floor framing. The blown in has the same kind of R value as the fiberglass of 3.2 per inch. The foamed in place, which is a polyurethane, has an R value of approximately 5 per inch. And again, the code will dictate, the energy code will dictate the requirements for the walls, the roofs, and the floors as far as code compliance. Typical compliances on walls, you might need an R value of 20. I'm sorry, an R value of 15 for the walls. Roofs are typically an R value of 20. And then if you have a slab on grade, you still have to have the polystyrene, the extruded around the perimeter for 2 feet vertical and horizontal. So it's important that you understand that we have to heat and we have to insulate buildings for multiple reasons. One thing, there was a study done some years ago, and it was a product of looking in some older homes that were built, and they noticed when they were removing the interior walls of the insulation, of the surfaces of the homes or buildings, that they noticed that a lot of the insulation was bunched down at the bottom of the wall cavity. And what they had determined was that as a result of moisture coming through the walls from the outside or from the inside, depending on which has more moisture, usually it'll be the inside, that the moisture condensated onto the insulation. It got heavier and it actually fell to the bottom of the air cavity, so we had these voids from several feet up to the top of the ceiling, and that they had no R value. So they came in and decided what they needed to have was a vapor barrier. That is actually the barrier that prevents moisture from traveling through and getting onto the insulation. You probably, the most common one that you see is on the fiberglass, and you'll see it where that side is now, typically they use the tar paper type, the paper type. They used to use the shiny. So what that does is, on that vapor barrier is to go on the warm side. So if this is inside the house and this is outside, that vapor retarder goes on the inside. And it's the same true for the roof or for a crawl space. So your vapor retarder goes on the warm side of the room or the building that you are designing or heating and cooling. And what it is in a warmer air has more moisture than colder air. So what happens is this barrier literally does that. It stops the moisture from getting onto this insulation. Once that fiberglass insulation gets wet, it has no R value, it's useless. So we have to keep the moisture off of that insulation. Along with that theory is that in attic spaces, You've probably been in attic spaces. There's a lot of moisture in attic spaces, so when you have insulation here on the ceiling, there's going to be moisture in that attic. The fact that it's so hot. Again, warm air has a lot more moisture than colder air. So we have to get rid of that air. And we get rid of it by venting. And what the code requires is that for every 1 square feet, for every, 150 square feet of attic area, you need 1 square foot of vent. That's net area, that's clear. If you have a vapor retarder on it, or vapor, it's doubled, so you need it 1 per 300 square feet. And almost all insulation that's used will have this. If you have a blown insulation, you probably don't have a vapor barrier on it. So therefore you have to use this for your computation. So it's easy enough to determine that. So what happens is that when you have, what you're trying to do is get ventilation in here to get it to go out, let's say the top, add some ridge vent. This is called stack height. And the code requires that you have 3 feet between the low and the high venting of these vents. So you typically have it on a slope roof, the overhang, you're going to have low, and at the top you would have a ridge vent. At the top. Obviously, if you have a flat roof, this is not applicable because you don't have an attic. Okay. Next thing that's covered under the book are the wall and the ceiling finishes. For the most part, gypsum has been used as the wall and ceiling finishes for literally centuries. And the process that was used years ago is not used that often anymore, and it's because it became labor intensive. For decades, the gypsum was actually a 3-part process. It was called gypsum, lath, and plaster. The gypsum itself becomes kind of a very pliable material. It's mixed, then it's applied with a trowel on the wall. The lath is just another name for the substrate that gives the gypsum its structural strength and something to apply to. The early days, they actually had strips of wood that would be nailed in between each of the studs at 16 inches on center. The strips of wood were basically 2 inches wide, and they were nailed up and down all the way and on the ceiling and so forth. So it was very labor intensive. Then they changed that and they went to a metal lath, where the metal lath was anchored to the studs every 16 inches, but they were all metal sheets. Then you started to apply your gypsum to it. There's, again, like I said, there's 3 coats to it. If this is your lath, you come on with your base coat. Then you have what's called your scratch coat. And then you have your final finish coat. And that typically was about 1 inch and 1/8 in thickness. So it was a pretty durable wall. And this was the standard up until and through the Second World War. And as a result of the end of the Second World War, there was a huge boom in the economy, and it was a direct result of the GIs coming home. And as a result of them serving in the service, the federal government made two programs available. One was a payment for tuition for college, to attend college, and second was what's called a VA loan, a Veterans Association loan to buy a house. As a result of those two programs, the economy just exploded in just a year after the end of the war. Where if you were in a college and a university that you had a student population of 5,000, and a year later after the end of the war, because of the VA benefits, that 5,000 student grew to about 20,000 students. And the same thing was true with housing. If you were building 100 houses a year, and once they implemented the VA program, you as a builder were building 500 houses a year. There was a huge explosion. And as a result of that, one of the things that if you look at, this is not just a three-part process in applying the wall finish, it also has to draw in between, and this is very labor intensive and time intensive. So this would take maybe 3 weeks on a regular sized house, or even on the interiors of an office building. And that was just killing the schedule. So the industry came out with the what's called gypsum board. Sometimes it's called rock lath. It's called drywall, sheet rock. It just depends on what part of the country you're in. In the Great Lakes area, we know it as drywall. You go out on the East Coast, it's called rock lath. You go further out west, it's called sheet rock. It's all the same material. It's gypsum board. The proper name is gypsum board. And what they did is the industry took the gypsum and they sandwiched it in between two sheets of paper. And the standard is the same. They're all 4 feet wide. The length would vary. They go from 8 feet up to 14 feet at 2-foot intervals. The thicknesses will vary. They vary from 3/8, ½ inch, 5/8, and 3/4. 5/8 is a very popular thickness on the gypsum board. And as a result of this invention, if you will, or technology change, it took a 3-week process down to 1 week. So that saved greatly on the time that they have for turnovers on these structures. And again, that's still used today. It's very common on office buildings and residential. I would venture to say 95% of all the structures use gypsum board on their interior finishes. Depending on the area, whether they use a ceiling or not. They also have the gypsum board that's called, it's a green board. It's a water resistant that's used in areas where you have water, such as toilet rooms or showers. It's important that you use that type of material there. The 5/8 and the ½ inch, they make them both. They have, in the code, it's called Fire Code X. And the code will dictate when you need the Fire Code X, which is in a fire rated partition or floor ceiling assembly. Another item that is taught and discussed in the book is millwork and finished carpentry. If you look at interior doors, most doors that you'll find for buildings are wood. It's a very popular finished material. You can paint it, you can stain it, you can have a nice texture to it. It's a very common material. They do make another one that is hollow metal. Sometimes they refer to it as a steel door. Those are typically, excuse me, on the outside of a building. Becomes more weather resistant, sturdier than the wood. The wood typically is used on the inside. The doors themselves will vary, but the common standard door is 3 feet wide by 7 foot high. That's the actual door size. Yes, you can have double doors, you can have glass and aluminum doors. You can have all kinds of different doors. You can have flush doors, you can have panel doors, you can have doors that have half lights. So again, doors can come in a great variety of glass types. I mean, you can have also the small 10 by 10 or no glass. They can come in what's called a 6-panel door. It's a pretty poor layout, but you get the gist of it. And the biggest thing to remember is that they're 3 feet typically in width. Also, the code requires that only swinging doors are allowed to be egress doors, so they literally have to be hinged. Sliding doors, revolving doors cannot unless they collapse. Along with the doors, you have to have the trim. So once you frame in the opening, if it's a wood, you probably have a wood trim. Other doors that come with its own, like hollow metal doors and frame, they come with its own frame as well. They install the frame first, and then the door just simply installed after. Whereas here you install the door first, and you come back and do the trim. Another type of wood that's found in interior of the house are cabinets. If you look at a standard cabinet installation, it'd help if I drew it straight. You have base cabinets and you have wall cabinets. There's standardization of these. This is one change that took place when the American Disabilities Act was introduced. And that is from the counter to the floor. The counter cannot be any higher than 2 foot 10 inches. Typical base cabinets are 24 inches wide. Counter's usually an inch or so larger. Wall cabinets are typically 12 inches wide. And they will vary in height. Thing to remember is that from the counter to the bottom of the cabinet, you're looking at about an 18-inch minimum. So that's so you can have enough room there for a microwave or a coffee maker or any other materials that you might have permanently on the counter. But these heights will vary, and they vary anywhere from 12 inches all the way up to 48 inches in height. And it's every 3-inch increment on these cabinets in height. The same is true about the cabinet widths. If you look at a standard cabinet, and it's the same for base and wall cabinets. They can come in pre-manufactured units that they're 9 inches wide, all the way up to 48 inches is one unit at every 3-inch increment. So 9 inches, 15 inches wide, 18 inches, 21, etc., all the way to 48 inches. The same is true with the top. You can get the bottom where it has doors and drawers. What ends up being different is the actual countertop. And that top can vary from standard plastic laminate to marble to granite. And now concrete actually is a popular material for some of the countertops. So this would be your countertop, and along with that, you need to have your backsplash. And that backsplash is typically 4 inches. That's a standard backsplash. You want to keep it cleaner, and again, as like the name implied, it's trying to keep the water from splashing onto the gypsum board or the back behind on the wall. A lot of times now these backsplashes are literally full height. Especially if you have a full height counter, you can run the backsplash all the way up. With the granite or marble, there's a lot of really nice mosaic patterns, etc. So these are typically found in office buildings for their kitchen areas or break areas. Sometimes it's used for storage. So there's a whole variety of uses of this. And these are standard cabinets. There are many manufacturers around. A lot of them are wood, some are plastic laminate. So it's going to vary from what you want as the designer. One item in a building that usually causes a lot of confusion for students is stairs. And maybe it's because there's a lot of math that goes with it. And there's a lot of requirements for stairs. Stairs are required anytime you have a change in level that exceeds 7 inches. The code requires that all stairs have a minimum width of 3 feet in width if it's less than 50 people. Once you get above 50 people, it becomes 44 inches is the minimum. And once you get into 300 or 400, 1,000 people like you have at some assembly areas, then these become much wider. The stairs are probably the most dangerous element in a building. I believe there's roughly 1.4 million accidents a year on stairs, resulting in several thousand deaths every year. So it's an area that we have to pay close attention to. And under the commercial requirements, the treads and risers, if I could just get some of that out. This is a standard section through the stairs. This element here is called the tread. That is your tread. This element is the riser. This piece is the nosing. And the stair itself is structurally held together on either end by what's called a stringer. Oops, S-T-R, stringer. Code requires that on commercial buildings the tread, and that's from nosing to nosing is 11 inches minimum in width. It also requires that the rise is 7 inches maximum and 4 inches minimum. So it has to be within those requirements. Again, it also requires that each tread and riser be identical in the design process, their heights and their widths. There is a construction tolerance allowed in the code that says that from the smallest to the largest tread or treads and or for the risers, there's a 3/16 of a construction tolerance allowed during construction, not on the drawings. So the drawings have to be exact. And so that means that when you have a floor to floor, and let's say it's 12 feet, you have to determine the number of treads and risers. So let's go through that exercise so that it doesn't become a mystery to you as to how to design the stairs, because they take up length and area inside a building. The first thing to do is to take your floor to floor. Let's call this the first floor and this is the second floor. And you have to convert that to inches. So it's 144 inches. I need to know how many risers do I need. The code says the maximum I can have is 7 inches. So let's design it for the maximum. So if I take 144, divide that by 7, I get 20.57 risers. Well, you can't have 20.57, you need to be a whole number. So therefore, you must go up to the next riser. So I have 21 risers. So now I take my 144 and I divide that by 21. And what is my answer? I get 6.857 of an inch. Well, carpenters don't deal in decimals of an inch. So I'm converting that 857 is, I have a couple of cheat sheets here, so excuse me, is approximately it's between 3/16 and 7/8. So what I would do would be fluid risers at 6 and 13/16 plus equals 12 feet 0 inches. So you would literally start your drawing, so you would have 21 risers. There you go. There's 21 risers there. So now that's set. Well, obviously you can see it's taking up a length of area. So I need to determine how many treads do I need? Or what's the length of my run? And let's say this is a straight run stairs. So I know I have 21 risers, and you always have one less tread when you have than risers. So I'm going to make them the minimum as required by code, which is 11 inches. So I have 20 risers times 11, I'm sorry, 20 treads times 11 gives me 220 inches. Divide that by 12 so I can convert it to feet and inches. And I get 18.33 feet. Well, I know that that is 18 feet and 4 inches. So that's my straight run stairs. Again, I have here 12 feet floor to floor, so I have 21 risers at 6 and 13/16 plus equals my 12 feet. And I have 20 treads at 11 inches gives me 18 feet 4 inches and more. So you can see if you lay out your stairs, the length is going to be, and also remember that the top and the bottom of the stairs, you have to have a landing. The landing itself, the minimum of any dimension on the landing is the minimum as required by the stair width. So if you have a stair, let's say you have 100 people, then the stair has to be 44 inches. So the landing is also 44 inches in this least dimension. Along with a treads and risers, you're required, and again, here's our strainer that structurally holds the stair in place. You also have a requirement for a handrail. The handrail is to be between 34 inches to 38 inches above the diagonal line that's made by the tip of the treads or the nosing. That's why you see most handrails are at 36 inches. It's actually right between the two. Also requirement is that, and these railings are used for guidance, is at the bottom of the stairs it requires that it extend 11 inches, and at the top of the stairs that the handrail extends horizontally for 12 inches. It gives you an opportunity to grasp the rail to go up and down the stairs. Again, stairs are not designed for the 22-year-old or 20-year-old college student. They're designed for the 95-year-old person and the 3-year-old kid that's trying to go up and down. These are used for guidance up and down the stairs. Another requirement for a stairs is a headroom clearance. You can't be bumping your head all the time. So the code says that, if you notice, by the way, I measure these vertically, that the headroom clearance is 6'8". So you have to design your opening so you have that kind of a clearance. The code also requires that every time that you have an open-sided floor that is more than 30 inches, as say this is 3 feet, you have to have what's called a guardrail. It's actually called a guard. And that guard is to be 42 inches above that floor. So that's why you see guards at the top of landings, on stairs, is to prevent someone from falling over and down into the space below. And the 3'6" or the 42 inches is designed to be at a height that is higher than your pivot point in your waist, so that you can't just simply keep falling over. Is to prevent you from falling over. The one thing that the code doesn't do, and I remember this phrase one of the very first code classes I took, I said the code is to design for the fool, but not the stupid fool. So this won't stop somebody. That happens every year, that they're at a baseball game or a football game and they've had a little bit too much to drink and they decided that they're going to walk this rail. It happened just this year at one of the baseball games. Somebody on the third deck had a little bit too much to drink and decided to walk the rail, and he fell down a couple levels down and died. It's unfortunate, but there's no way to stop somebody from doing that. Again, you should be able to go over this if this wasn't clear the first time. Go over it again and again, because these are great questions for the exams. And also, NAB looks for this kind of information on the drawings for accreditation. Another common element found in buildings, there's flooring materials. There's a lot of different flooring materials that can be used. But one of the first things you have to understand before you select a material, what is the floor subbase? Is it concrete? Is it wood? Is it a combination? What is it? It's easy enough to come in and say, okay, we'll put down carpeting. There's a lot of different carpeting that can be put down in spaces. But if you want to get into something that's a little different, maybe it's a wood flooring. And there's two basic types of wood flooring. There's planks. There's planks and strip. Do a blank there. The planks are really uneven flooring. Like so. Whereas the strip flooring is all the same common sizes, and these will vary anywhere from 2 inches to 8 inches in width. For the strip flooring, it's a constant 2 1/4 inch width on the floor itself. And typically these are oak. This is a maple or some other flooring, and you stain it. Please don't paint it. It's intended to be a stained floor. This was very, very popular in the 50s. One of the downsides with wood flooring is that it does not absorb any noise, so there's a lot of reverberation. And you go into room, if you look at the classrooms at Lawrence, and especially in the lower level in the architecture building on the north end, you have a hard surface on the floor, it's a vinyl tile. You have a block or CMU on the walls, and you had gypsum board as the ceiling material. Actually it's gypsum plaster. All of a sudden everything bounces. The only thing that's in the room that absorbs sound are the people, our clothing. So it tends to have a lot of echo in that space. If you want to get into a wet area or something that maybe has a lot of more color to it, you get into some kind of maybe a ceramic tile flooring. You could get into marble, you can get stone, and again, it is whatever your desire, and they will vary in size. I mean, they'll go from 2 inches to 2 inches. You can get them to 8 by 4s. A common one, a very common, is 12 by 12. And now the European cuts are coming in, and those are roughly 18 by 18. And the variety is endless. Colors, shapes, textures, that's all up to you. You have to be careful though where you put this surface. One thing to remember is that with the implementation of the American Disabilities Act in 1990, there is a slip resistant coefficient that all floors in buildings have to be able to have a certain resistance to slip and fall, so that there's an actual texture to it. And getting into the final finishings in spaces, the most common one is painting. They paint the walls, paint the ceiling. You can put wall covering in on the walls. Heck, you can put wall covering on the ceilings. You can put tile, ceramic tile on the walls. You can use paneling. Finishes include things like cover plates on your outlets, both for your data and your phone. Then you get into also caulking. And that pretty much rounds out the entire interior of a building. Again, this is covered all in Chapter 7. So have a good day.